are 5 mistakes you might be making in your first chapter, and I'm going to tell you why and how to fix them. But first, I've got to admit that I absolutely do this myself too. It's hard to remember all these things that you have to put into a first chapter, but those first pages are so crucial to getting the reader to sign on and stay on board with the whole book. I'm going to use a book that might be surprising to you guys to talk about how to do this right. Project Hail Mary. Now, granted, this was a blockbuster hit. The movie was amazing. The book was amazing. But what makes the first chapter of Project Hail Mary so interesting is that the character's basically all by himself. And that means he doesn't really have other characters to bounce off of, which changes things. It changes the pressure for the author to create a really engaging first chapter. That's why I chose this, because I wanted to show you guys how you can do it even if you don't have another character on the page. The biggest mistake most people make is they start way too early. They figure they've got to get the whole history in there. Like, here's the kid growing up, here's them going to college, here's them sitting down for breakfast. That is basically small talk in your book. I really, really hate small talk. I'm actually really bad at it in real life. I forget to put it in all the time in emails and text messages and stuff. I just want to get to the point. And it's the same with the book, with the reader. They want to just get to the point. Project Hail Mary definitely doesn't start too early. It starts in the middle of a very confusing time for Dr. Ryland Grace. He wakes up and he doesn't know where he is. He's not even sure what's going on. He can't see. His eyes aren't even open yet. So he wakes up literally totally in the dark about what's going on. It is the catalyst, essentially, right, for the plot that sets off everything that Ryland Grace does. That's the inciting incident, the part that kicks the whole story off, whatever you want to call it. I call it the catalyst because I like to think of it as like an explosion that really sets off the plot. And he wakes up having no idea where he is, what's going on, why he's here, and he's hearing this voice. And it's not the voice of another human. It's a computer saying, what's 2 plus 2? So confusing for him, confusing for the reader, but intriguing enough that I kept reading. The other common thing that a lot of us do, and I do it all the time still, and it was a big part of why my first 10 books got rejected over and over and over again, I have the videos to prove it, is backstory dump. It's like a neighbor coming over and going, can I tell you my whole life story before we even meet and have a cup of coffee? You don't care yet. And that's why a backstory dump doesn't work. You have to build the connection with the reader before you can start putting backstory in there. And backstory must be triggered. A smell, a sight, a color, any of those kinds of things can trigger a backstory moment. And for Ryland Grace, it happens on page 9 when he sees a red line of blood. And that reminds him of something else that's red, because he has up to this point not remembered anything about who he is or why he's here. So we didn't have a backstory dump because he has no backstory to work with in his mind. That red line sets off just like a few paragraphs of backstory. The third mistake a lot of people make is choosing the wrong point of view to start with. Now, a lot of people ask me, which point of view do I choose to start my book? Because it is hard if you're working with multiple protagonists or even protagonists and an antagonist. I like to choose the character that has the most to learn or the most to lose, because that way you have built-in stakes. That first character is also a lot like a baby duck imprinting on you. Like, people find baby ducks and they raise them and the duck imprints on the human as if it's their mother. That's basically what your first chapter is doing. It's giving a person for your reader to imprint on. So you want it to be somebody that they are going to connect. If Project Hail Mary had started with Rocky, for instance, we probably wouldn't have imprinted on him the same way, because Rocky was an alien. So we might not have imprinted on him the same way as we did Ryland, who is kind of out of his depth, doesn't know what's going on, and you're immediately connecting with him. It's super important because this is what is going to keep them reading the next 500 pages. The fourth mistake most people make with their first chapter is having no clear goal for the character. And the reason that happens is because they started too early or they had a big backstory dump. So basically they're dragging pages until they get to the actual goal. Or maybe the book doesn't really have a very strong plot. You can totally set this up even if the goal is small by goal standards. I have a video that I've been working on about the first chapter of a romance because you guys asked me about that. And the first chapter in the romance that I'm analyzing for you guys, his goal is basically to get through the next 30 days with his kids. That's a small goal. It's not a huge goal, but the stakes are high because it's his kids. You want the reader to say, okay, this is why we're here. This is what matters. Ryland's goal of just trying to figure out what is going on and how he can survive is pretty dire, right? That's a big stakes. So it really works as a goal until Ryland gets the whole picture. You don't have to have, like I said, a huge, big stakes, bad guys are coming down, trying to chase him down and shoot him kind of thing. You can have something as simple as trying to figure out what's going on. Fifth mistake that a lot of people make is they have a weak character voice. I think it can be hard to write a really strong character voice because doing that means getting in touch with what's going on in here in yourself, because you're creating these characters from your own learned experiences or from the emotions that you're trying to get across, emotions that maybe you don't want to feel. Do you want to feel scared and alone and taken advantage of like Ryland does? Or do you want to kind of like go through your life not having those feelings? Most of us would vote for the latter, right? Because it's not fun to feel scared or alone or not in control. The only way that you can make a character that really comes to life, however, in the first chapter is to breathe those emotions into them by making them someone that is relatable. I have actually like a ton of videos on that because that's the thing that is probably the hardest to do out of all of them. It's a lot easier to figure out how to cut the backstory than how to make the character relatable and emotional. The way that Andy Weir does that in Project Hail Mary is he makes Ryland snarky. Ryan Gosling does a great job of that in the movie, making Ryland Grace really relatable by his humor and his snark. That's something that makes me hear the character's voice and see them. There's just little things that Ryland says. He's got all these electrodes and tubes and stuff in him, and he thinks to himself, one's in my gentleman's equipment and two disappear under my thigh, and I'm guessing one of them is up where the sun doesn't shine. That can't be good. So that little bit of humor. He does this other thing that shows us that he's really smart without Andy Weir telling us he's really smart. The computer asks Ryland, what is the cube root of 8? I take a deep breath and speak slowly. 2 times e to the 2I pi. And you're thinking, what? Maybe he's still in this coma? What's going on with him? The computer tells him he's incorrect, and he realizes, I wasn't incorrect. I just wanted to see how smart the computer was. The answer, not very. So in that first chapter of Project Hail Mary, and in the first chapters of most of the books that I talk about on this channel, you've got the 5 ingredients for a great first chapter. Action. Things are happening. We're not just in his head the whole time. Even as he's thinking, what the heck is going on? The computer's doing stuff, the robot's doing stuff, he's trying to do stuff. There's action. There is intrigue. We're confused, we're wondering what's going on, just like he is, and we're really trying to piece it together. So that's keeping the reader turning the pages. There is humor. Humor is a great unifier, right? You don't have to have a joke on every page, but some kind of humor or connection with the reader is important. There are stakes because he realizes in the first chapter that the other people on the ship with him are dead. So there's some pretty important stakes. There's a reason they all died, and he doesn't want to be in that same camp. And then finally, it's emotion and connection. We care about Ryland. We want to see Ryland succeed. Because he comes across on the page with his voice, we see him trying and failing, trying and failing. And that makes him relatable. Trying and failing is conflict. And like I've said in a bunch of videos, you need conflict on every page. And watching a character try and fail connects us to them because we respect that. We want to see them succeed. And so now we're rooting for them. So in the comments, let me know what you're struggling with in your first chapter. I actually have a new series called Fix My Story, which you can see right here, where I take the first 200 words of your book and tell you what I think you could do to make it stronger and better. Tell me about the last book you read that was a really great first chapter that got you hooked and kept you going to the very end. Don't forget to like and subscribe. And in the meantime, I will see you on the other side of the page.